In the velvety, bourbon-soaked air of a West Village speakeasy, the neon pulse of Times Square seemed like a distant galaxy. Rose, her iconic pink hair expertly tucked under a nondescript navy beanie, laughed, the sound as melodic and low as the jazz trio nearby. Beside her, Bruno Mars, trading his fedora for a simple baseball cap and dark sunglasses despite the indoor gloom, traced a pattern in the condensation of his glass. No cameras flashed, no fans screamed, and no eager publicists managed their image. Here, in the quiet frequency of Manhattan's deepest shadows, they weren't global powerhouses. They were just two people finding a clandestine rhythm. The city was their sprawling electric canvas, providing the perfect camouflage for a romance that could send the internet into a seismic shockwave. They had mastered the art of the invisible stroll, moving through NYC like fashionable ghosts in heavy coats and shared secrecy. It was a dangerous game of hide and seek, fueled by the rush of risk and the desperate need for something authentic. The adrenaline of potential exposure didn't dampen their connection. Instead, it electrified every stolen glance and accidental touch. They were dancing on the sharp edge of a razor-thin secret, and the thrill was intoxicating. "You think they'll ever figure it out?" Rose murmured, her eyes reflecting the soft, warm glow of the speakeasy candle. Bruno grinned, a flash of soulful mischief, and gave her hand a gentle, knowing squeeze under the table. "As long as we don't drop a joint album titled Secret Manhattan Tryst, I think we're good," he teased. He valued this quiet kingdom they'd built. This silent space where they didn't have to be perfect, just present. Every note he hummed now felt like a coded message, a secret ballad meant for an audience of one. They exited the bar through the back alley, the crisp autumn wind catching Rose's collar and causing Bruno to pull her closer. Their breath bloomed in the cold air, a shared vapor in the indifferent city night. A sleek, unmarked black sedan waited at the curb, its windows tinted to near opacity. Bruno held the door for her, his arm a subtle protective shield against any prying eyes that might be lurking. The streetlights overhead blurred into a kaleidoscopic blur of gold, red, and electric, chaotic blue as the car merged into midnight traffic. In the backseat sanctuary, the world outside was just a muted, flickering sideshow. Rose rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes as the driver navigated the familiar twists of Central Park South. They spoke in soft, intimate whispers about things that had absolutely nothing to do with charts, tours, or viral moments. They discussed childhood dreams, the fear of losing themselves to their personas, and the simple joy of finding a hand that understood. The pressure of being global icons evaporated, leaving behind only the simple, profound reality of two hearts beating in unison. Their destination was a penthouse that overlooked the sleeping giant of Central Park, a sea of dark trees encircled by glowing towers. Bruno poured 2 glasses of ice water, watching Rose stare out at the massive city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She seemed so small against the massive architectural scale, a delicate star in an artificial universe. He joined her at the glass, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they stood in silence, observing the urban sprawl. They were the unofficial monarchs of this secret realm, ruling over a domain that existed only between these 4 walls. "Tomorrow I have to be Bruno Mars again," he sighed, the weight of the name and the expectation settling back onto his shoulders. Rose turned in his embrace, her face softly illuminated by the moonlight reflecting off the Hudson River. She placed a hand on his cheek, grounding him in a way that fame never could. "And tomorrow I'll be the girl they think they know," she replied with a gentle, somewhat melancholic smile. Their lives were a carefully managed performance, a double act where they only truly lived when the curtains were tightly drawn. The morning sun began its inevitable ascent, bleeding across the Manhattan skyscrapers and painting the room in hues of pale gold and smoky lavender. They shared a quiet, lingering breakfast on the terrace, secluded from the street below by strategically placed, manicured hedges. The scent of dark coffee and expensive pastry mingled with the cool morning air, a scene of domestic normalcy that felt completely surreal given their realities. They didn't need words to express the heavy knowledge of the day's impending separation. Every single moment in this protected bubble was a stolen treasure, gold hidden in a mountain of endless demands. By noon, the charade would resume, and they would exit the hotel via different service elevators, hours apart, to avoid any chance of suspicion. Their managers had coordinated complex, coincidental sightings in entirely different parts of the city to maintain the narrative. Rose was scheduled for a high-fashion editorial shoot in Brooklyn, and Bruno was booked in a studio uptown. To the paparazzi and the fans tracking their every move, they were miles apart, dedicated purely to their respective unmatched careers. Only the subtle scent of his cologne on her worn scarf remained as proof of their midnight magic. Rose sat in the makeup chair, her face a blank canvas for the artist to transform into a global phenomenon. As they applied the striking eyeliner and shimmering glitter, she looked at her reflection and watched the protective mask slide back into place. Deep down, she was still thinking about the speakeasy and the way Bruno's laughter sounded when they were entirely alone. She briefly scrolled through her phone, seeing a headline about her mysterious, lonely life in New York, and repressed a satisfied smirk. If only they knew that the most famous man on the planet had held her hand just hours ago. Across the city, Bruno was laying down a complex vocal track, his voice echoing with an emotional depth that puzzled even his longtime producers. They praised his artistic growth and the raw, soulful yearning in his delivery, completely unaware of the true inspiration behind it. He wasn't singing to a fictional muse. He was singing directly to the girl who was currently posing for cameras in a drafty warehouse. The music had become his only safe outlet for the truth, a coded confession wrapped in infectious rhythm. Every single note was a hidden love letter, a secret message transmitted across the airwaves. The rest of the week was a frantic blur of interviews, sound checks, and strategic social media posts that kept the internet guessing. They liked each other's professional photos with clinical detachment, fueling rumors that were quickly dismissed by various inside sources. The online world was a chaotic storm of theories, but the truth remained perfectly safe, tucked deep within the pockets of their hearts. They met again on a rainy, moody Tuesday evening, this time in a small, cozy Italian trattoria tucked away in a quiet, non-touristy section of Brooklyn. The trattoria was a haven of red checkered tablecloths, the smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes, and families who didn't care about pop royalty. Rose wore glasses and had her hair in a simple bun. Bruno wore his beanie and sunglasses, which he only removed when they were seated in the back. They shared a bottle of modest red wine and a plate of pasta, laughing at the sheer, beautiful normalness of it. Here, the internet's noise couldn't reach them, and for 2 glorious hours, they were just 2 people enjoying dinner in each other's company. "I think the secret might be keeping us sane," Bruno mused, idly tracing a fork pattern on the table. Rose nodded, her expression soft and relaxed for the first time in days. "It's nice having something that belongs only to us," she agreed. In a life where every move was a potential headline, this privacy was a radical luxury. They talked about the future, about a day when they wouldn't have to hide, but also acknowledged that this secret game had its own beautiful intensity. For now, the secrecy was their sanctuary, protecting their love from the relentless, harsh lens of public scrutiny. They spent their final afternoon in the city in a massive, dusty bookstore near Union Square. They walked through the aisles separately, meeting in the poetry section, where they could talk softly without drawing attention. They discussed art, philosophy, and the kind of dreams that weren't measured in record sales or endorsements. It was a reminder that even in a city of millions, it was possible to find profound isolation if you knew where to look and what to avoid. It was these mundane moments, the quiet shared space amidst thousands of books, that felt the most significant. Back in the sedan, heading toward the airport, the weight of their respective realities began to descend like a cold Manhattan fog. Rose had a flight to Seoul in an hour, and Bruno was flying west to Los Angeles for high-stakes industry meetings. This was the truly difficult part of their secret arrangement, the constant coming and going, the temporary nature of their physical closeness. They held each other a little tighter as the car sped toward the private terminal, their silence louder than any stadium ovation. "I'll find you in London next month," Bruno promised, his voice thick with a mix of heavy sadness and defiant hope. Rose nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat as she stepped out of the private car and into the sterile terminal environment. She didn't look back. She knew that if she did, her resolve might crumble completely. She walked through the gate, her large security detail flanking her, once again transforming into the untouchable idol the entire world adored. But beneath her designer coat, she wore a t-shirt he had given her, a layer of hidden warmth. Bruno watched her plane disappear into the cloudy New York sky, feeling a sharp, physical ache that music couldn't soothe. He drove back to the city, Manhattan suddenly feeling much colder and more indifferent than it had been hours ago. He sat at the grand piano in his suite, the keys cold under his fingers as he began to play a slow, melancholic tune. The city lights flickered outside, a million simultaneous stories happening at once, but only one mattered to him. He was a man with everything, yet he was waiting for a simple text. The message finally arrived just as the Manhattan sun began to set, a single purple heart emoji that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. Rose was safe, she was thinking of him, and their beautiful secret remained perfectly safe and intact for another day. He smiled, the tension leaving his frame as he leaned back and watched the stars struggle to break through the city's electric urban haze. They were playing a complex, long symphony, a musical piece that required incredible patience, perfect timing, and an unwavering commitment. One day, the headlines might change, and the world might finally see what they had built in the quiet, protected dark. But until that day arrived, they were perfectly content to be the most beautiful mystery Manhattan had ever managed to host. Their love was a masterpiece painted in disappearing ink, visible only to those who knew exactly how and where to look. As the city that never sleeps finally began to quiet down, the two stars remained perfectly aligned, separated by massive oceans but irrevocably connected by a secret New York night.